everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be discussing our next classification of serial killer, the hedonistic killer. These are individuals who kill because there's something in it for them. There's some selfish payoff they're going to get by committing this murder. Could be they're going to get some money, could be they're going to get some sexual satisfaction. Whatever it is, there's something in it for them. Now, unlike the other classifications that we've already talked about in this class, the hedonistic classification has three subcategories. The first subcategory is the lust killer. These are individuals who somehow confuse sexuality, sexual fantasy, sexual gratification with murder. The second classification are hedonistic thrill killers. These are individuals who tie up sexual fantasy, sexual satisfaction, sexual gratification with the idea of torturing, creating as much pain, fear, and violence on a victim as possible. The third one is the comfort killer. And these are people that kill usually because there's some financial payoff related to killing this person. Or maybe it's some type of payoff related to my station or my status in a certain group. But there's something I'm going to get from it. So let's start with a deeper dive into the lust killer. The hedonistic lust killer essentially sees the process of killing someone as part of their sexual fantasy and how they're going to achieve sexual gratification. It creates a drive in them, a burning drive where they want to fulfill this ever-changing, ever more deviant sexual desire that leads to murder. Now, usually it doesn't start with, I want to go kill someone because I think it's sexually appealing to me. It can, but that's usually not the process. Process usually follows something like this. They start out with pornography, and then that's not enough to give them the sexual satisfaction that they need. And so the pornography gets continually more graphic, gets continually more deviant, start seeing things like sexual assaults being portrayed, sexual violence, attacks, mutilations, those types of things as part of the pornography. After a while, that's not enough. And so they may start peeping into people's houses and get the excitement of actually seeing a live person, maybe taking a shower or changing clothes or whatever. And then that's enough for a while. But after a while, that wanes and gets a little boring. And so they may try breaking into houses just to be in the room next to someone taking a shower without them knowing it, or changing clothes or something like that. And that's enough to give them some sexual gratification. And then it might progress to attacking the individual, sexually assaulting. And then eventually it progresses to the logical next step in the mind of a lust serial killer, murdering someone. And then even going beyond that with necrophilia and retaining what they call trophies of the killings that they've committed. They'll actually cut off body parts and take them back with them and preserve them because they're going to interact sexually with them later on. And it creates a sense of closeness to them with their victims. It allows them to keep a piece of the victim with me or with the serial killer as they go away. Now, usually these types of killers don't quit killing. That drive doesn't go away. Those sexual desires don't go away, and they become very powerful. And so it's very, very rare that you see a lust killer actually quit killing on their own. Usually one of three things happen. One, they get arrested. They're arrested, they're in prison, they're incapacitated. They don't have access to victims, therefore they can't commit these murders. Two, they're killed. If they're dead, they can't continue to perpetrate these murders, and so the killings stop. Or three, they become disabled in some way where it becomes impossible for them to commit these crimes. Now, one of the misconceptions in the public that I've heard over the years is that these types of killers and some types of pedophiles and different people, one way we should deal with this crime is through chemical castration, which makes sense from a common sense point of view, since most of these perpetrators are males. If they're no longer to perform sexually, then the sexual violence should go away. But what we see is that oftentimes the sexual ability to fulfill these desires goes away, but the desire to fulfill them doesn't go away. And so they find more innovative, more destructive, more life-threatening ways, more violent ways of getting their sexual thrills. They will use other types of devices for sexual penetration and that kind of thing. So it really isn't an effective deterrent or an effective way of dealing with a lust killer. They're driven by their sexual fantasies. And as they continue to progress, they will change the way that they do things. They'll change the fantasy changes, and as the fantasy changes, the ritual they use to commit their murders changes to coincide with those changes in their fantasies. This murder is just part of the sexual process. It's part of fulfilling this sexual drive and desire that they have. It's not necessarily that they want to kill, but it's part of how they get sexual satisfaction. And to them, that makes it worth it. Their gains are completely psychological. It's just this fulfillment of their sexual fantasy, this sexual gratification that they're going to get by committing this murder. They're often unaware of the reason that they have this drive. And this is something you see in interviews with a lot of serial killers who would fall under this hedonistic lust category. They're often very unaware of what this drive is, why they have it, or how to turn it off. And it's something that has developed over years of fantasy and progression that has brought them to this point where it's really hard to turn that off. The sexual fantasy will actually change over the years, and you'll see the crime scene change to show those changes in the person's sexual thought processes. One of the books that I suggested in the links below, a book, The Allure of Premeditated Murder by Dr. Jack Levine, one of the giants in this field. I had the privilege of meeting Dr. Levine a couple years ago at American Criminological Association meeting. He talks about in the book how this drive, and compares it to when you decide to go on a vacation, and you want to go on a vacation, and you spend a lot of time, you're looking at hotels and you're looking at things to do and you're making plans, and then you're really excited and you've had a really good time planning this vacation. It's going to be the perfect vacation. And then you go and the weather's not good and they have trouble booking you into the hotel, and luggage got lost. Whatever it is, things happen. People get sick, and it never lives up to the fantasy of the vacation that you were planning. You actually get more pleasure out of planning of the vacation than you did out of the actual execution of the vacation itself. And so the next time you might adjust your plans and try something different to try to have a better vacation. In the mind of this lust serial killer, it kind of follows a similar type of thought process. In their mind, they have this beautiful vision, or what they think is a beautiful vision, of how this murder is going to occur, how they're going to get sexual pleasure out of this act and that act and leading up to this act and the other act. But when they actually kidnap the person, they actually go through the process, maybe the person doesn't cooperate exactly how they had planned. Maybe they die sooner than they were expected to die. Things don't really go exactly according to the fantasy of the serial killer, so they'll just... they may get tired and bored like they did with breaking into people's houses, and they may progress and decide that they need to do something different to try to spice up things and make it more exciting for them. So there's a lot of reasons why they're going to change as they go through. They'll get more aware of how to dispose of evidence and that kind of thing, cover the tracks up, and so that might adjust the crime scene just a bit as you go forward. And so you may see changes in the crime scene as you go through. But everything about the crime scene will be about giving them some type of sexual gratification or sexual pleasure. You might not, as the investigator, understand that when you first walk in. You may not connect that there's something sexual about what you're seeing in this crime scene. But in the mind of the serial killer, it makes perfect sense. And you don't know what type of fetishes, deviant desires they may have. You don't know what they're trying to portray sexually in the process of committing this murder and what type of evidence that's going to leave. So it might not make sense to you right away, but as you continue your investigation, as you get to know the mind of this offender more, it may become more clear. You may start piecing things together and get a better picture of the person that you're dealing with. They do have an ideal victim type. And that's who they're sexually attracted to. We're all sexually attracted to certain types of people. We all have our preferences. And usually it goes through a normal progression where you date somebody and you marry, whatever the normal progression. With serial killers, they also have an ideal victim type. And this murder is all about their sexual fulfillment. So who they pick to be their victim is going to be all about who gives them the most sexual pleasure, who fits this fantasy that they've created in their minds. And that's going to be their ideal victim type. Paying attention to that can be very helpful in your investigation because you can learn geographically. They tend to be geographically stable. They tend to want to have their own little hunting grounds, as they call them, where they can pick up people who are these ideal victim types, and they know they feel comfortable about where to pick them up where they might not get caught and all those types of things. And they just feel very comfortable with the surroundings of committing those crimes. And as an investigator, if you know that, then you can put police officers in those areas to look around. You can maybe you decide to let the public know, depending on how you decide to go forward with your investigation. There's positive benefits and negative benefits to that. So that if you fit this description of this ideal victim type, maybe you don't want to be in that part of the community, or you want to take extra precautions, bring a friend or something. So it can help your investigation quite a bit to understand that ideal victim type. They like to victimize strangers, and that's for a couple reasons. One, they usually have a different life besides their life as a serial killer. And you don't want one life infringing on the other life, because one life could destroy the other life if the other life finds out that you're out there, killing and mutilating other people. Second, the first thing a detective is trained to do in the case of a murder is to start looking at people within that victim's inner circle. Look at the family, look at friends, look at coworkers, employers. See if anybody is going to benefit by this person's death. Maybe there's been arguments. Maybe there's some animosity. Whatever it is, usually you're going to find the person who killed somebody within their inner circle, because usually you have to have a good reason to kill somebody. People just don't go usually out and just kill somebody for no reason. Usually there's something there to link them to the murder or to provide some type of motive for it. So if you can place distance between you and the victim by having no connection besides killing them that day, you decrease the likelihood that the police are going to be able to trace you and connect you to that victim. And so you increase the likelihood you're going to be able to stay on the streets and continue committing crimes. They prefer close contact kills. That's basically because it's part of their sexual fantasy to kill you. They want to be up sexually assaulting you. They want to be intimately involved in the process. They want to be in close contact. They don't want to have they don't want to shoot you from 300 yards out. They want to be in there and present and part of the event. They often engage again in necrophilia and keep souvenirs to both keep them close to the victim and allow them to have some sexual gratification from the person even long after death. So, because again, it's all about their sexual fulfillment. And as it progresses naturally in the mind of the serial killer to necrophilia and those souvenirs. And again, they'll often use other things besides their bodies to commit sexual acts against their victims. Use different types of objects and that sort of thing. Whatever becomes a part of their sexual fantasy. And it's really, really individualized to that person and what they find sexually appealing and what they feel like is going to give them the most bang for their buck, the most gratification. They're very process focused. They're going to spend a lot of time designing, fantasizing, creating a ritual that they're going to go through to commit this kill that's going to provide them the most sexual gratification that they can get from this process. So it's not just about killing you and getting out of the way. It's about the process of killing you and beyond for a lust killer. They're very organized, again, and they plan very well. Not just because of the sexual fantasy, but also these people tend to be pretty smart again, and they're trying to come up with ways not to get caught. And so they'll be organized and trying to eliminate evidence and those types of things as well. And they tend to be, again, geographically stable for the reasons we've already discussed. Edmund Kemper is a good example of a serial killer who would be classified as a hedonistic lust killer. He actually operated in the Santa Cruz area of California in the early 1970s, around the same time as Herbert Mullins, the guy that we talked about as the visionary killer who killed to try to prevent the earthquake in California, was killing in that same area, which caused some confusion for police officers trying to determine what victim they should ascribe to what serial killer, and trying to understand what's going on when you have all these deaths showing up, and some fit the pattern of this one and some fit in the pattern of the other. It can be very confusing. But anyway, he killed 10 people, including his mom. He was a troubled kid, had a pretty bad upbringing and family life, was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He was sent at one time to live with his grandparents, who he killed. And after he killed him, he called his mom and said, "I killed my parents. What do I do?" And she's like, "You stupid little kid. You stand there and wait for the police to show up." And he does. He stands and waits for the police to show up. He's released when he's an adult. All his records are sealed. And after a while, he starts killing. His ideal victim type were women that reminded him of his mom. In essence, he was killing in effigy his mom over and over and over. And it became part of his sexual process, and really the only way he could achieve sexual gratification was through these sexual encounter and murderous encounters. Eventually, one of the people at the police department noticed that he had bought a gun, and they had seen the child records that had been blacked out, but could see that he had a record of murder, and so he probably shouldn't have this gun. They drive to his house. He pulls up. And they ask him about this gun. They say, we have to confiscate the gun and give you a receipt for it. And he thinks, oh my goodness, they caught me. And later on, he admits that his idea was, hey, I'm caught. I'm going to go back here, get this gun, and shoot these 2 cops and run. The 2 cops were veterans, and so they knew better than to let him go get the gun out of the trunk. One of them stood by while he stood to the side, and the other one went and got the gun out of the trunk. And they drove off. That's all they were really interested in, was the gun. They really didn't have anything to connect him. He had been paranoid about getting caught for a long time. He had actually started going to a pub that was frequented by police officers, just basically to listen in to see if they were sharing any information and gotten farther into the case. Maybe they had gotten closer to knowing he was doing it. His idea was, if he ever got caught, was just to shoot it out with the cops and, die, I guess, in a blaze of glory or whatever. And he decided that he was busted, essentially. These cops, this isn't all they want. They know, they're on to him. They know what's going on. They're going to arrest him. It's pretty much over. And he realizes at the very least he can't kill anymore. And in his mind, the only way to stop the killing was to kill the person that he was killing in effigy every time anyway. So he goes in and he kills his mom in her sleep, decapitates her, actually uses her head for a game of darts, invites his mom's best friend over, kills her as well. Evidently there's some animosity there. Gets in his car, drives a couple states over, pulls over, calls the police, basically says, "I have some information on these murders," and turns himself in. So that's Edmund Kemper. That's a good example of a lust killer. Serial killers are individuals that also kind of entangle the idea of sexual fantasy and gratification with murder. But in their case, it's not the murder that they're interested in. Matter of fact, murder is kind of not what they want. Murder is like, oh, it's over. It's kind of like the end of a pleasurable experience. And now I've got this dead body that's basically garbage that I got to get rid of. It's in my way. So for a serial killer, they're more interested in, they get more of their sexual fulfillment through the idea of causing torture and pain and fear and anguish on their victims. These are the worst of the worst serial killers. You never want to be a victim of a serial killer, but you really don't want to be a victim of a hedonistic thrill killer. These individuals will plan out in their fantasy how they can cause you the most pain and anguish and suffering and fear without you dying. They will sometimes read medical books about how an experiment as they go through and commit these crimes and try to find ways, try to figure out how far they can push the human body and the human existence before they'll die, so they can keep you alive and continue the suffering. Because once you're dead, it's over. All the fun is over. I got to go get somebody else. They're driven by sexual fantasy again, but their fantasy is not about the death. They don't engage in necrophilia. They don't take a lot of souvenirs and that kind of thing. They don't want to get close to the person that they're abusing, and they don't want any reminders as far as body parts of what they've done, for the most part. Now, there are exceptions, but for the most part, the deed's over, the fun's over. They're more interested in the pain and the suffering that you can only show and only get from a live victim. The anticipated gains are psychological. It's all in their mind. It's all about their own sexual gratification and fulfillment of their own sexual fantasy. And they have this drive and this desire to continue to kill. The crime scene, again, just like the lust killer, will make sense to the thrill killer and to their sexual fantasy. But at first, you may not connect those dots as an investigator. It's a little bit easier to connect the dots with a thrill killer than a lust killer, because what you're going to see are items and what they would call tools of the trade, sometimes geographic areas that they take their victims to that have a setup that allows them to torture and mutilate and do the things that they want to do to cause this pain and fear. And it will become really apparent to you that this person's been doing some pretty evil things, and that these devices were made to inflict pain and torture on individuals. So it's a little bit clearer than you would have with a lust killer in that respect. They have an ideal victim type, just like the lust killer. It's whoever they are attracted to, whatever body type, age, haircut, whatever it is. It's their ideal victim type of who they're most sexually attracted to, who they feel like will make the best victim for them. Usually these are strangers for much the same reasons. It creates that distance between them and the person that they're killing, which makes it more difficult for police to investigate, and also allows them to have their separate life of their normal life and their serial killing life. They'll often stalk their victims, not so much because they want to know their, patterns and when's the best time to take them captive and all that, but because stalking itself creates a lot of fear and dread in an individual, and they feed off that. So for them, it's kind of like a teaser sexually for themselves of what's to come. And the fear that the person's given off is just really good for their sexual fantasy. They prefer close contact kills. Again, this is a sexual crime in nature, and they want to be up close and personal. They want to be a part of that process. And will do almost anything to prolong that suffering. Whatever they can do to make your life more miserable, more painful, more harmful, more fearful, that's what they're in for. And they will sit and dream about and design devices that they can use that will inflict this pain and torture, and come up with fantasies about how they can prolong and make this a month-long event of killing you and torturing you and all these things they're going to do to you. And as they go through, again, they'll learn, they'll develop, they'll change, learning, a person can take this will kill them too quickly, I don't want to do that, but this will prolong the suffering, and those types of things. So they really put a lot of thought into it, a lot of effort. They take immaculate care of their tools of the trade, because those are the things that give them pleasure. And they'll think about and create the perfect little playpen for them to be able to commit these crimes. They tend to be geographically stable. They want to be where they're most comfortable. Plus, they want to be closest to the place that they've created where they can commit this long suffering of an individual. With a serial killer of this type, the victim may be alive and suffering for weeks or months. And so you have to have somewhere to house them. You have to have somewhere to have your tools and your equipment set up so that you can do this. Disposal sites vary with these types of offenders. They will either be out in the open or they'll be hidden. And it really depends on the sexual fantasy of the person committing the murders. They will be hidden if they're just done with you and they just want to get you out of the way and they don't want to be caught, because that creates more time and distance between them and the victim and makes it harder for the police to connect the two. If they may leave it open, kind of like in an area where they know there's a walking trail just a few feet away and they're going to be discovered relatively quickly, because they may get enjoyment out of the fear that places on the people in the community. And so they see these news stories and they see people panicked and changing their way of life and how they live their life because they're afraid of becoming a victim of this person, and they're just eating it up because, again, that's fear and anguish and things that they love. And so it feeds their sexual desires, it feeds their mentality and gives them that extra little bonus kick. David Parker Ray is, to me, the most evil serial killer in history that I've ever researched and looked at. He's better known as the Toy Box Killer. He operated in the 90s. Probably, I would guess he was probably operating in the 70s through the 90s. Who knows how many people he's tortured and killed. But we never convicted him on a murder, which goes to show just how good these people are. But probably, I mean, it's countless how many people he has probably killed over the years. Essentially, he would drug them or have them drugged, brought in. He would chain them up, put them in a box, put them in an area, strip them. The first thing they would hear when they woke up and came to their senses, they realize they're chained up and they can't move, they can't get out, they're terrified, and they'd hear this, what was then a cassette tape, start playing. And I won't play the tape here. The tape is available. It was presented as evidence in his trial, so it's public record. But I chose not to play it here because it's very graphic, very detailed, and very disturbing. And I really didn't want to, because I didn't know how my listeners would feel about hearing that. If you're interested in hearing it, it is available. It's readily available on YouTube. I mean, just search David Parker Ray's tape and it'll bring it up. But it's very graphic. Basically, it goes something like this. You're laying there, you're chained up, you can't move, you're probably nude, you're scared, you don't know what happened, you're terrified, you don't know what's going to happen next, and you hear this cassette come on with David Ray's voice on it, basically telling you, I know you're afraid, I know you're scared, no sense in trying to fight it, you can't get out, you're going to be raped in every possible way, and sexually assaulted, and victimized, and tortured, and basically, it doesn't matter how you feel. It doesn't, just basically putting as much fear and dread right away in this individual as he can, which is his ultimate goal anyway. And he's starting that process off early. It's not about initiation and trying to gain compliance. I mean, how do you not comply when you're chained up and you can't move? So it's more about starting that fear process, starting that dread, starting that those internal systems going and feeding off of your fear and your anguish, even at that point. Eventually he was caught. One of the women got away, ran over to a neighbor's house naked, called the cops, and they go over and they find his toy box. It was basically a trailer that he had where he had like a gynecological chair set up, and all around it, as a matter of fact, here's a picture of it. And as you can see, all around it, there are different types of devices he has created to inflict pain and torture and sexually assault these individuals in every possible way you can think of. I mean, just looking at that room is terrifying. Imagine the torture that he's able to inflict on these victims with those types of devices. And then eventually he gets tired of them, or they may die through the process, and they basically just get discarded in the desert. This was really, to me, this is the worst serial killer that I've ever heard of. The last subcategory of the hedonistic killer is the comfort killer. Now, these are individuals who kill usually because there's some type of monetary gain involved. These are your mafia hitmen. These are your little old ladies that own a boarding house, and they have people sign in that have they get like Social Security checks and don't have much family, and they kill them and just let those checks keep coming. Those are those individuals. Sign a huge life insurance policy with the full intent of killing this person. That's your hedonistic comfort killers. I'm going to kill you, and my life's going to become more comfortable because I'm going to get some type of monetary gain by you being gone. Their victim type is not specific, but it's not random either. They're not just going to kill anybody. Their victim type is who's going to get me some money. You know, who is the hit on? That's my victim type this time. Who is the person that comes into my boarding house that doesn't have a family, you know, or a lot of family connections nobody's really going to miss and call the police on, so I can keep collecting these Social Security checks. Their methods of killing are often act focused. With a hedonistic comfort killer, I just want to get you out of the way and get paid. I don't want to have any long, detailed process here. I just want to get the act over and get paid. With these individuals, though, they are well planned and well organized. They don't want to get caught. And so they'll go through great lengths to make sure that their plan includes ways of covering their tracks, getting rid of evidence, all that kind of stuff. And also they'll be well planned in how I'm going to execute this. What do I need to do to make sure that I get this person dead and quickly and in a way where I can get this money back for myself? They tend to operate in a more geographically stable format, close contact, close quarters. Not close contact as far as the killing. You might have a hitman that kills somebody from 400 yards away with a rifle, but close in the way that they have a geographic area that they operate in and they feel comfortable in. Here are some examples of some people who would be classified as hedonistic comfort killers and serial killers. First one, Dorothea. This is basically your old person who kills people and collects their checks, that kind of thing. Sammy the Bull Gravano. He was a underboss for the Gambino family in the 80s. I was actually brought up on charges in, I think, the early 90s. He admits to killing 19 people and technically would be classified as a serial killer and a hedonistic comfort killer because he killed to maintain the status within the organization that he worked. So his comfort came from maintaining his status in the criminal organization. Roy DeMeo, y'all heard Richard Kuklinski probably. Roy DeMeo is the real deal when it comes to mafia hitmen, a very violent individual. We're not going to go into these three with any detail, but I want to throw out their names in case you wanted to go find out more about them on your own. Plenty of information out there on the internet, YouTube, all those places. So if you want to know more about some examples of comfort killers, there's some really good examples. With that, I'm going to leave you. I'll see you next week when we talk about our power and control serial killers. Have a great week.